we're moving on now into our next session. This next speaker is in fact my co-organizer today. So let me move to his face. This is the ever-lasting spotlighting. All right, so let me say a couple of words before we hear from Joe. So here's Professor Joseph Romero. He's professor and chair of classics at Mary Washington College. He works on Latin poetry of the Augustan period, with a particular interest in poets' engagements with philosophy. In 2017 to 18, he was fellow of the American Council on Education. And here he's going to speak with us today, Walking with the Cleopatra Ode, Then and Now. Take it away, Joe.
All right. Well, I'm grateful that everybody was able to join us today, and I'm so happy that we're able to welcome people from all over the UK and the United States, as well as countries as far afield as New Zealand and Europe, outside of the UK, in Europe, and all the way to Russia. So welcome everyone who's able to join us, and thank you for sharing your talents and your goodwill with us today. I'm going to start my slideshow. So I'm sharing my screen now, and I think you should be able to see me. A few disclaimers before I start my talk. First off, knowing that we have an international audience, I need to start by saying I have to talk about what I know a little bit better than other things, which is higher education in the United States. Also, I should point out that in COVID circumstances, I haven't had access to a library. Although my university's in Virginia, I've been holed up in Delaware for 2.5 months now, and so it's felt like lockdown experience, and I've had to work from the limited library that I keep at home. And finally, this is the walking with Cleopatra is a bit of a strained metaphor, but I do think best when I walk, and I've had an awful lot of time to do it these last few months. And my memories of walking with the Cleopatra Ode are so vivid and repeated over the course of my life that I couldn't resist the title. This is a bit of a different paper, maybe, and different for me, certainly. My goal is to share with you my personal experiences as a student and a researcher and as a teacher of this poem. I've been reading it for about 30 years now, on my own and with professors and as a professor. Part of that experience has been my willingness to acknowledge my own ethnicity. I am Filipino American, and that's not something that I normally bring into a conversation. I think it's fair to say that I probably thought and acted as though it wasn't even a feature. So when Brett talks about the color blindness, it is possible even to be a person of color and to for parts of your life be blind to it, and to the needs that are occasioned by it. So this is a kind of a personal talk, and I think that I can shed some light on both the discomfort and the lack of it in the way I've experienced this poem over the course of my life. And I hope that to the extent that you can sympathize with my training, my experience, that it might help you understand part of your own context. So I've organized this talk into 5 major, little stopping points. One is the context in which I met and have experienced 137, the Cleopatra Ode, how I have always taught it until more recently, some of the changes that are going on and have gone on that might have affected the way I've experienced the poem, the way I've experienced my profession and my discipline and my role in higher education. And that leads me to dilate out a little bit toward thinking about the roles of higher education, or of education in general, And the way that that plays out in our thinking about what we do as teachers, administrators, as academics, period. And then I'll conclude with a little reflection on the things I look at now when I revisit this poem in the classroom and at home. So first, meeting the poem in question. So unlike probably most of you, I learned all of my Latin and Greek in college. I fully thought that I would be a literary critic, but I thought it would be in French. I didn't, literature, I didn't think it would be classical literature, but I took a year of Latin and then of Greek, and I was, smitten. And so, but I wasn't a Horace guy until I studied at the Centro in Rome, my senior year of college. And it was a birthday present to myself. I had never read the poem before, and I hardly knew anybody because my birthday fell early in the term. And it was, it was not the only thing I read by Horace, but it certainly captured my attention, and the things about it that I liked are his ability to hold positive and negative in tension and balance. And I always felt there was a kind of a courage in being able to do that. And I would walk with this poem in my pocket and around Rome in that era, from the Gianicolo down to Trastevere. I would walk through the Forum Romanum, and I'd imagine myself, as we often did in those days, as the Triumphator, and not as the not as the conquered or the dispossessed. Walking down the Sacra Via and towards the Capitolium. So that's an experience that was very vivid in my mind. I probably reread it again dozens of times in graduate school with Gregson Davis, who's, to my mind, the best, if not one of the best, if not the best, Horatian of my acquaintance at any rate. And I probably gravitated to Gregson to a degree because we're both men of color. Maybe unconsciously, maybe not. And so he's also a student of Elroy Bundy, the great Pinderist, and his mode of exegesis is fairly formal and rhetorical. But to say that he was not sensitive to issues of social justice would be just to completely miss the point of the man. So that weighed heavily in my experiences of this poem, and Horace was a special author in my education, and so that's another piece of me. And in the last 2 decades as a professor at the University of Mary Washington, I've taught a Horace seminar at least 5 times, as well as reading Horace in independent studies. I've read it as part of my research, and admittedly, I read it for pleasure as well. So this is a poem that I know well. I feel like I know well. I thought that I knew well. But over a lifetime, you experience different parts of it differently in accordance with who you are at that moment and the contexts that are shaping you. So the next stop on my trip is looking at the ways that I would typically teach Carmine 137, which you see before you. And I'm not going to make you read it with me. You see a translation in front of you, which I hope you can avail yourself of. That's Niall Rudd's Loeb translation. But I think it's fair to say that I read it in a fairly formalistic way. Given the demands of an undergraduate education, where students are often coming directly from intermediate Latin, I, being a good card-carrying member of the profession, felt as though people needed to be able to parse every single word and understand every verb, verbal, and otherwise, and that they could, and that they could track the logic accurately from beginning to end. And so not just the grammar, but also a more formal approach, that is to study the rhetoric. What is the author's intention, and for the audience that he's writing? And I would teach it as an encomium, where the praise of the laudandus, you're hearing the good Bundian language, is focused through one particular deed, the victory at Actium, and the focus on the victor and the defeated, and we'll return a little bit to what kinds of things he focuses on along the way. But in a fairly simple format, an encomium, fairly straight and simple, but also modulated to Horace's lyric project.